Luca, thank you so much for joining me today to talk about Takashi Hiromitsu and his work. I'd like to first find out, how did you choose this artist?
Well, thank you so much for inviting me, Allison. I'm very excited to be in the talking part instead of the editing part of this channel. So for how I picked him, I mean, I feel like we've always had some kind of a bond. I mean, behind me, I know it's kind of hard to see, but these are two rams that he printed, and I'm year of the sheep, and I'm also an Aries. So he actually did these for me even before I was born as a gift to my mother. So I think that already, we were always we were already acquainted even before I was born. And he was actually the first person when I moved to Japan who ever taught me how to bow. So, I've kind of always had a lot of respect for him as an artist, and I've always been surrounded by his works. So when my grandfather, brought up the idea, yeah, I was all for it.
When you were choosing the images for the book, and I think that we need our viewers to know that the book is available and we'll be providing all that information in the description at the end of this. It can be ordered from Tokyo. How did you choose the prints? And in fact, we're going to be speaking specifically about 5 pieces today, but what drove your selection? Is it that you're really interested in kabuki or?
Well, I definitely wanted to get a good spread between the, very heavily kabuki influenced works and then also the ones in which he had a little bit more of a creative input, especially for the five that I picked today. I feel like there's a good balance between the direct representation of kabuki while also having kind of his own artistic creativity shine through that. So I wanted to get a good glimpse of both.
So let's start with the first of the five, which is karagoromo. And for people who don't speak Japanese, this literally translates to Chinese robes.
So yeah, so this one I chose, it's really a beautiful piece. You have the irises in the back, you have a woman kind of enshrined in moonlight. And this one is basically based on how there's a nobleman, an ex-nobleman named Ariwara no Narihara, who was forced to leave the capital of Kyoto after an affair that he had with Takako Nijo, who was supposed to be a mistress to the emperor. All kabuki stories kind of have this extremely detailed, extremely interwoven premise. So basically, as the nobleman was on his journey, he encountered the person he had the affair with, Takako again, with the irises in full bloom, and Takako actually appeared as a spirit of the water iris. And then he danced with her in the moonlight and this beautiful kind of image, recalling their life together in Kyoto while he was on the run. So, this is and in the print you can see her, like I said, in the moonlight with, just kind of appearing in this mystical way as the spirit of the water iris. So.
Quite often, I think that everybody thinks that kabuki is only tales of warriors. So I thought it was interesting that you chose this really lovely reminiscence, of a couple's journey together. Tell us about Hanafubuki.
Yes. So if I'm not mistaken, that translates to flower snow, which is extremely apt because the whole premise is that there is this man named DyEing, and he wants power over kind of the emperor and just people in general. So he imprisons the princess Yuki, and he also had previously killed Yuki's father. And Yuki's father had this ability where he could draw animals so realistically that they seem to come to life. This is one of my favorite stories. So Princess Yuki attempts to avenge him with a sword, but DyEing's men overpower her, tying her to a tree with rope, and binding her there so she can't move. And she's tied to a cherry tree, which is a very, very important detail. Luckily, this was in spring because Princess Yuki kind of channels her father's artistic ability to draw pictures of rats with her feet, which makes them magically come alive and chew through the ropes for her. And in the image in the print, you can see, little rats on the ropes gnawing through the material, through the fibers, while, just Sakura snow seems to just flow downward as she's just making more and more pictures to free herself. So this is
I
one of my
think,
favorite ones. Yeah,
and I think that a lot of people might not understand how absolutely convoluted these kabuki plots are, right?
they
There's
really are.
always so much happening. Maizuru, is that also a kabuki dance or?
That one is a similar. It is. It's basically what it does. This is one where Hiromitsu's presence really shines through because he actually directly changes something that happens within the story to be more artistically interesting. So Maizuru is a very colorful piece, and basically the woman in the center, surrounded by all the colorful cranes, the origami cranes, is named Onatsu, and she fell in love with an apprentice in her father's shop named Seijuro, and they decided to elope. However, money is found missing from the father, and Seijuro is charged with theft, and he's put to death. Um, and he's executed. And Onatsu is so just taken aback and abhorred by this that she wanders around in madness, throwing up Buddhist prayer slips. But Mitsu has very interestingly chosen to show them instead of Buddhist prayer slips as origami cranes. So I think that's just an interesting touch of his to make it a lot more colorful and a lot more, reminiscent of kind of a happier memory
I
than
think that
something tragic.
one of the things that I always notice about Hiromitsu is his incredible design sense. And I wonder if you could talk about where he might have gotten that design sense. I think his parents are both in the field,
Yes,
right?
yes. I mean, his mother specifically worked a lot with kimono and the dyeing of fabric and the print and the kind of printing and the production of fabric. So he was definitely he's definitely artistically gifted, but his parents have also it's definitely a long line of artists, and he had a lot of influence. And Mori Yoshitoshi also obviously must have provided him with a fair amount of influence as well.
I think so. I think that probably growing up in that household, he was really affected. I mean, he learned so much from that exposure. Tell us about Katsura, which to me was one of the most interesting
Yes,
ones.
yes. So actually, the paper itself that it's printed on is made by a living cultural treasure, Kubota Akira. So already, even before anything, the paper that you're working on is made by this incredibly talented person. But this story is also, I chose this for a very specific reason, which it kind of does detail how almost all kabuki stories kind of end in this incredible tragedy with almost all the characters either dying or being imprisoned or just something tragic befalling them. So there's an ex-shogun named Minamoto no Yorie, and he was confined to a village named Shuzenji, and he basically is in love. He's in love with the daughter of a mask maker named Katsura, which is who the print is named after. And the father of Katsura, the mask maker, named Yashao, is ordered by the ex-shogun to make him a mask that looks just like him. Yashao
Mm.
makes this mask, but it turns out that it contains the shadow of death, and therefore he doesn't want to give it to this ex-shogun. But Katsura, ignorant to this, gladly delivers it to him with unaware of her father's premonition because they're in love, and she just wants to, she has no idea, so she brings it to him. And when the shogunate forces find out where where Yorie is, they come to get him. And Katsura tries to pretend that she is Yorie, so she puts on the mask, where
Mm.
they are both instantly killed by the shadow of death, which is in the print itself. You can see, Katsura kind of doubled back as the mask almost overtakes her and she's falling to the ground, probably in her last moments of life. So I really, it's such a convoluted story, but it's kind of told so well through the print, and I really love that about Hiromitsu's work.
I think that anybody who starts looking and studying Hiromitsu's work will get such a huge lesson into Japanese history, both
Mm,
military history, the history of the plays, mean, that's what's always been so fascinating to me is, and by your writing the book, it's wonderful that you've been able to interview the artist and get him to tell you these stories, because even I think probably many Japanese people who don't go to the kabuki won't, they won't know the background of
Yeah,
the prints, but it's
yeah,
more interesting when you know.
yeah. I mean, it's definitely something that's such a cultural treasure and such a huge part of Japanese culture itself that, you know, a lot of Japanese people look at these prints and they know the stories behind them, though there are more esoteric ones that, that are more unknown and, less um, understood. But I think it's great that I got the opportunity to kind of show these stories to a more Western audience who wouldn't immediately look at this and say, oh, this is the story of, this person, Lady Rokujo, who we're going to
Right.
be talking about next, all those kinds of intricate kind of almost vernacular that we don't that a Western audience may not consider.
Exactly. And I think a lot of young Japanese people too are getting, they're
Yeah,
moving away from knowing the
that's a good
tradition.
point.
So our final print is Moshitsu, or desire. And I know
Yes.
that it's comes from the tale of Genji, which
Yes, it
certainly is
does.
very, it was the first novel ever, right? So tell us about this print.
So first of all, even just the design of the print, it's almost, I like to call it a faux diptych,
Hmm.
because he very intelligently he puts a pillar in the middle. So you kind of, it almost looks like a diptych until you're confronted with it and you just realize it's part of the space. But that space, let me explain the story and then I'll explain the space. So there's a woman named Lady Rokujo, who's one of many lovers to Hikari Genji, the Shining Prince. She's an older woman of a very high position, and Genji has many affairs, and she feels very disrespected by this. Genji, however, is careless because he's the Shining Prince, so he finds another lover named Yugao. Lady Rokujo kind of becomes just completely enthralled by her jealousy, and her spirit becomes vengeful, and it takes possession of Yugao and kills her. So the print depicts Genji with a bow and arrow, trying to fend off Lady Rokujo's vengeful spirit as it, kind of lunges for Yugao. And I think, like I was saying, the pillar in the middle kind of represents the space between both the two lovers, but also Genji and Lady Rokujo. And interestingly, it's almost like Lady Rokujo and Yugao are on one side and Genji's on the
Hmm.
other. So there are just so many different ways to interpret this print, which I think is just amazing. And the faces are so expressive. I mean, the spirit itself, is definitely in a way kind of almost nightmare worthy. It's definitely not something you'd want to encounter, especially not with just a bow and arrow.
Well, and I think because the Shining Prince was known for his valor, that
Yeah,
he probably felt I can confront this. But you're right, that looming spirit, it is so terrifying, and it's wonderful that Hiromitsu can that he can convey that just on a simple piece of paper. Now, I know that stencils are really difficult to make, and I
yes,
wondered if you could tell us a little bit, not so much about the process. I think perhaps at the end of this, we can include links so people can watch,
yes,
the
yeah.
printing. But are there any, before we go, are there any specific things that you would ask people to look for in Hiromitsu's prints? Maybe the
Well,
size, the limited edition, or
yeah, yeah. I would say that one of the things that people should really appreciate about Kappazuri is the incredible detail work that goes into each stencil. I mean, the stencils themselves are works of art, truly. Especially, for example, a good example is Hanafubuki's rope. Even just that simple, very thin, hyper detailed rope must have taken hours, if not days, to just stencil out. So I think any, kabuki work that has a lot of little intricate details was really a labor of love and a labor of passion and a labor of just immense craft to be able to do this and have the kind of patience and the understanding of how to get all these lines to look like exactly what they're supposed to. Um, I mean, there is a reason why he is kind of called the last practitioner of Kappazuri, is because it is such a difficult art form that just making a rope is such a difficult labor. But I think that's what makes them all the better, is that, you see all these elements of them, and you know how long each of them must have taken to complete. So
And we might want to remind our viewers that the way that stencils are made is by taking a very sharp knife and cutting into the stencil, which is often thickened paper.
yes, yeah, many layers of washi paper or other paper stacked on top of each other. And
thickened with a persimmon.
yes, a persimmon resin usually. So
it seems so incredibly complicated. And then when you realize, because the stencil is fragile, that Kappazuri, the stencil prints, that's why they're in such small editions, because the paper might rip, right?
Yeah, but one of the most interesting things is that, you know, the paper is fragile in many ways, but you end up washing the paper itself, you know, to get rid of the paste that you put on, so you can cover it in sumi ink. So you end up, you know, kind of almost scrubbing this paste off underwater. And I remember watching him do this and thinking, you know, it's so fragile in this sense, but in this other sense, you can really go at it and just kind of scrub it all away, or scrub away, obviously, the parts of it that are needed. And I just remember being so kind of in awe of this, because water is the enemy of most prints, you know. But here we are washing away the ink and the paste. So I was kind of struck by that.
Do you have any insights as to what, or will Hiromitsu go in any new directions, or do you think that he'll keep on commemorating the kabuki and the traditional arts of Japan?
Well, I think one thing that's great is that, you know, he does have this great balance between the kind of traditional kabuki stories and then also his own twists, like we saw with Maizuru turning the Buddhist prayer strips into origami cranes. You know, that is something that does take a lot of creativity, and I'm sure he'll kind of continue to interpret Kappazuri works in his own eyes and in his own ways. I mean, though obviously an expert of Kappazuri, he's also an expert of kabuki. So I feel that, you know, as time goes on, he'll get more and more confident about altering kind of these infamous works of kabuki and interpreting them in his own way through Kappazuri. So I feel like over time, as we've already seen with Maizuru, he'll kind of change more and more to his own creative vision, and to be also just more visually appealing and visually attractive. So yes, that is
Thank
my
you.
prediction.
Thank you very
Yes.
much. I
Thank you
hope
for having me.
everybody that you will watch this, share it, and subscribe to our channel. Thank you.